Hey guys, now welcome to what is probably the most important video for Descartes, and that's because we're going to discuss this really important concept called the cogito. What is the cogito? I'm sure some of you already know, but some of you don't, and I'm not going to tell you what it is right now because I'd like you to understand how it has been derived or concluded, whatever word suits you best. So, what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to summarize and then read how Descartes derived what we call the cogito. To do that, we need to draw from our prior knowledge. Then we need to explore what deception actually is, and more importantly, what does deception imply, or what is deception a smaller example of? It's part of a broader subset of something else. Okay, and then we need to define the cogito and explore how it was concluded or derived. You pick the word. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Can you write those down, pretty please, with the cherry on top, and then can you score yourself on out of 4 on them? That'd be great. And then I want you to do some research, see if you can find out who this guy is. See if you can do it with Google Lens, Siri, or Bixby, whatever you want to do. Just take a photo, press the magic button, see if you get an automatic search. It worked for me. Tell me who this guy is and why do you think he might be important for this overall discussion? I'd like you to tell me, or I'd like you to write it down if you're doing this for homework and then come and tell me the day after. Okay? Cheers. All right, so let's get into some logic straight away. The second meditation starts with Descartes again admitting that he's sitting down and he's writing a book and he's thinking. And while he's thinking, he's returned to everything he visited in his first meditation. So he's sitting there and he's doubting his body. How does he know that exists? He doubts even physical objects and, of course, mathematical logic or a prioris. All these things could be the product of that evil demonic genius which has created this immersive deception which he is being thrown into. So he then asks one really important question. How do I know I exist, which is the new part of the content? So that's the first question he starts asking himself. How do I actually know that I exist? Can you take a note? And once he asks that question, he starts looking at one thing that he thinks is probably got a degree of certainty tied to it. It was, even if he was thrown into this world and being deceived, there's someone who's actually performing the action of being deceived, and that's me. So how do I know that I exist? Well, of course, let's say that I am being deceived about just about everything. There has to be an I in the first place in order for me to be deceived. So then he concludes, hey, I exist. This is my first certainty. If I'm being deceived, there must be something performing the action of being deceived. Therefore, that thing must exist. So if I'm being deceived, there must be me performing the action of being deceived, and I have to exist to be deceived, so therefore I have to exist. And that is the first formulation of the cogito. The cogito is borrowed from a phrase which I'll tell you right now. It's called cogito ergo sum. We'll explore that a bit later. And basically it says, I think therefore I am. And this is basically the first implied argument that Descartes provides, okay? And it ends up being the first implied argument for the cogito, which ends up being his basic certainty that he bases the rest of his philosophy on. So let's have a look-see, all right? The way that we can derive him admitting that this has to be something alive, or no, there has to be something being deceived in order for deception to occur, and how he moves into cogito ergo sum is pretty easy, because deception implies thinking, right? So the person who's being deceived is also the person who is thinking, because deception is a form of thinking. So if I exist because I know I'm being deceived, or I know that I exist because I know I'm being deceived, or more importantly, I am because I am being deceived, then you could say, well, hang on, I'm thinking, which is a form of deception, therefore I must be, because there needs to be something that performs the action of thinking. Take a note. That's the most important part of all of Descartes. It's this realization that there has to be a subject that performs an action of thinking in order for that thinking to occur. So if a subject must perform the thinking, the subject must exist because he can readily admit that he's being deceived. All right. So let's go over this again. All right. Deception is a form of thinking. Right. Someone has to be performing the action of deception for deception to occur, so that someone must exist. If he knows that he's being deceived, then he knows that he's being exist because someone has to be deceived. Being deceived is a form of thinking, right? Therefore, if he knows that he's being deceived, he knows that he's thinking, and someone must be performing the action of thinking for thinking to occur. Hence, I think, therefore I am, which is what cogito ergo sum means. Cogito ergo sum literally translates into I think, therefore I am, right? And it was first literally phrased not in the meditations, which are the books that we're reading, but in this book called On Method, right? A Discourse on Method. And he basically first phrased it as I am thinking, therefore I exist. There has to be something that performs thinking, because thinking can't occur without a subject being able to perform it. That's how it works. So cogito ergo sum is I think, therefore I am, but the first time we encounter it, it's implied, right? It's not directly stated in this formula. And that's what we need to understand. Can you take a note? And as we read further, what we're going to find is that because this is one thing that he's 100% certain of, if he believes that he is being totally deceived, he must exist because he's performing the action of being deceived, then this is, you just cannot be certain. You cannot not be certain of it. It's 100% certain. So this becomes a foundation for many other certainties that he's going to build a philosophy upon. The cogito is the underpinning core first principle that every other part of his belief system will be based on, okay? Or sorry, every other part of his philosophy will be based on in order to find certainties, because you can only build a certain philosophy based on a core certain principle, which is what he said in the first meditation. Take a note. And then at the start of this, he basically points out a metaphor. I mean, Archimedes wanted to do something great by just finding one single thing, which is the fulcrum point. He said, if you give me a lever big enough to move the Earth, I'll be able to move it using the appropriate fulcrum point. Well, I want to find a belief system that's just like this fulcrum point, and then I'm going to use that to do great things. So he uses Archimedes as a bit of a metaphor to explain why he wants to find that certainty. Take a note. Alright, so let's start reading the second meditation. It's pretty easy to get now because we've gone through that summary. Okay, second meditation, the nature of the human mind and how it is better known than the body. So serious are the doubts into which I have been thrown as a result of yesterday's meditation that I can neither put them out of my mind nor see any way of resolving them. It feels as if I have fallen unexpectedly into a whirlpool which tumbles me around so that I can neither stand on the bottom nor swim up to the top. Nevertheless, I will make an effort and once more attempt the same path with which I have started on yesterday. Sounds like he's Alice in Wonderland, doesn't it? He's in this crazy world that's just driving him mad. Anything which admits the slightest doubt I will set aside just as I found it to be wholly false. So even if it's highly probable, but it has a degree of uncertainty, bang, it's gone. I'm looking for the certainty. And I will proceed in this way until I recognize something certain, or, if nothing else, until I at least recognize for certain that there is no certainty. Archimedes used to demand just one firm and immovable point in order to shift the entire earth. So, I too can hope for great things if I manage just to find one thing, however slight, that is certain and unshakable. I will suppose then that everything I see is spurious, which kind of means pointless. I will believe that my memory tells me lies and that none of the things that it reports ever really happened. I have no senses. Body, shape, extension, movement, and place are chimeras. That means like an ancient Greek monster. So, what remains true? Perhaps just the one fact that nothing is certain. Yet, apart from everything I've just listed, how do I know that there is not something else which does not allow even the slightest occasion for doubt? Is there not a God, or whatever I may call him, who puts into me the thoughts I'm now having? But why do I think this, since I myself may perhaps be the author of these thoughts, so I can't be certain of God making me think the thoughts? Okay. In a way, this is because this is like the 10th time I've read this document, right? And every time you do read something the 10th time, new things occur to you. So it's really important to read and read again. But to me, this is just a little bit of cleverness, because what he's saying is that, again, I can be uncertain about God putting these thoughts into me because I can imagine a scenario where I myself are the author of these thoughts. So we've got 2 degrees of uncertainty, right? So I can dismiss these 2 ideas, okay? So let's go and keep reading. In that case, am not I at least something? But I have just said that I have no senses and no body. This is the sticking point. What follows from this? I'm not so bound up with the body and with the senses that I cannot exist without them. Sorry, am I not so bound up with the body and with senses that I cannot exist without them? But I've convinced myself that there is absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Does it follow that I too do not exist? So that's where he starts doubting himself, which logically follows from where he says, look, it's uncertain in these 2 sentences, right? No, if I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. That's kind of like the first hint at the cogito. Maybe you should underline that and just say the first hint at the cogito. I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed because I'm performing an action. I am the subject performing the action of convincing myself, alright? That's really important. Give you some time to take some notes. But there is a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. In that case, I too undoubtedly exist, if he is deceiving me. And let him deceive me as much as he can, he will never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I think that I am something. So, after considering everything thoroughly, I must finally conclude this proposition. I exist. It is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or convinced in my mind. Or conceived in my mind. So what he basically said here is, if I'm being deceived, then I must be the thing that is being deceived. So I must therefore exist. So let me go over that again. If I'm being deceived, then I must be the thing that is being deceived. Therefore I must exist. Only a subject can be deceived. I'll say that again. Only a subject or a thinking thing can be deceived. That's the cogito. I think, therefore I am. Deception is a thought of thinking. Is a form of thinking. It's performed by a thinking thing, which is a subject, and what logically follows from that, therefore, is I think, therefore I am. This is the first time we've encountered the cogito in any of his writings. Just say it again. If I am being deceived, that's proof that I exist because I am performing the action of being deceived. Deceiving is a form of thinking. Therefore, if I am thinking, that's proof that I exist because I am the subject performing the action of thinking. Okay? So let's quickly go to our success criteria. Did we draw from prior knowledge? We could not have understood any of that argument if we didn't know about his process of radical doubt and all the things that he denied in the first meditation. It would be impossible. Have we explored what deception is? Well, yeah, deception implies thinking, which is why I didn't want to directly outline it here. But, deception is an action performed by a thinking subject. Well, not necessarily... Sorry, let me just rephrase that. It's kind of a passive formulation of the word deception. If I am being deceived, right, I must exist. So that's really important. It's not necessarily me performing the perception, because that would act on an external agent. It's basically the act of me being deceived is a proof that I think, because just me being deceived or going through the process of deception is actually a form of thinking, a form of understanding in some way or shape or form. So did we define the cogito and how it was concluded? Yeah, sure. It was derived from the conclusion that he's 100% certain that if he is being deceived, he must exist in order to perform the action of being deceived. So this guy's really important because he's a thinking thing, and only someone who thinks can be deceived. And the fact that we are 100% certain that in order to be deceived we must exist and therefore we doubt everything and say everything is a deception, well, we've found the ultimate certainty, the ultimate rational foundational proof that we can use for the rest of our philosophy when we try to build it up. And that's it. Cheers.